Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The answer wasn't in what they said, but in what they didn't. Riley Grant sat at the far end, coffee cooling untouched, papers neatly aligned before her like props in a play she no longer belonged to. Every time she shifted in her chair, the conversations around her shifted too, like currents flowing around a rock in a stream. Eyes flicked past her, never at her. Voices carried on, carefully neutral, carefully polite. But underneath the quiet choreography of military professionalism, Riley heard what she had learned to hear after nearly 2 decades in uniform. The words unsaid. She had once been the voice people leaned toward in rooms like this, the steady anchor in a storm of opinions. Now she was the silence people avoided. Her left hand flexed around the handle of the coffee cup. It was a habit she couldn't break, testing, reminding, punishing herself. The hand still ached in humid weather, still stiff when the desert nights dropped too cold. A scar ran across her palm like a map of a place she'd rather forget. The others at the table saw the hand and thought they saw weakness. She let them believe it. But the truth was more complicated than scars. "Lieutenant Commander," a voice broke through. Young, earnest. Ensign Tyler Brooks, sitting 2 seats down, leaning slightly forward like a cadet eager to impress. He was too new to understand the rules of silence, too green to know that no one asked Riley Grant for input anymore. "Do you have recommendations for the M16 handling drills?" The room shifted, not overtly but enough for her to feel it. Heads turned fractionally. A pause stretched thin. Brooks hadn't gotten the memo, the unspoken briefing that she was no longer the one you asked. Riley lifted her gaze. The kid's face was open, sincere. Annapolis still clung to him, all fresh polish and untouched idealism. He believed merit was currency. He believed performance mattered more than politics. She wanted to believe it too. "Yes," she said simply, voice low but firm. "Start with respect. These rifles aren't just tools. They're extensions of the person holding them. If you rush, if you fake confidence, they'll punish you. Make them understand that." Brooks nodded quickly, scribbling notes like he'd just been handed classified gold. The others around the table went back to their guarded discussions, as if her words hadn't happened, as if she had spoken to a wall. She told herself it didn't matter, but it did. The Nevada desert outside the hangar shimmered under a cruel sun, waves of heat rising off the tarmac. From her vantage point, Riley watched recruits stumble through drills, rifles clumsy in hands that hadn't yet learned the weight of responsibility. She corrected postures, adjusted stances, forced herself to move with the calm assurance of someone who had nothing left to prove. But the tremor betrayed her. Small, barely visible, enough for those looking to see. Sergeant Red Kowalski saw it. He always did. A Marine on cross-training duty, built like a brick wall and carrying the smugness of someone who thought discipline was a competition he always won. He smirked from the shadows near the ammo bunker, arms crossed, a spectator waiting for failure. Riley ignored him, or tried to. When the sun began its slow descent, painting the desert sky in gold and fire, the news came. Admiral Victor Hale was arriving. It spread across the base like a weather report, inevitable, undeniable. A man like Hale wasn't just a visitor. He was a storm system. Convoys rolled in, black SUVs glinting beneath the unforgiving light, brass packed inside like cargo too delicate for dust. Riley watched from her office window, a knot forming in her stomach she pretended wasn't there. Admiral Hale stepped out of the center SUV, posture carved from marble, uniform edges sharp enough to cut glass. Silver hair perfectly arranged despite the wind. Medals and ribbons that spoke of a career paved in ceremony, though not all who earned ribbons earned respect. His stride said he owned the ground he walked on, every grain of desert sand bending to his will. Chief Petty Officer Lena Morales walked in without knocking, as always. 15 years of friendship bought that privilege. She dropped into the chair across from Riley's desk, her dark eyes scanning Riley's face with a mix of loyalty and worry. Heard the old man sniffing around for dead weight, Morale said, casual, but her voice carried weight of its own. Word is he's making cuts, wants examples. Riley didn't look up from the training report spread before her. Then he's come to the right place. Don't do that, Morale said quietly. Don't write yourself off before the fight even starts. But Riley had already written herself off. She remembered Kandahar, the night she put 3 shots through a terrorist's scope from nearly 800 meters, watching an enemy sniper's arrogance die before he even knew she was there. She remembered missions in mountains where the air was thin and mistakes killed. That woman, the one they whispered about as Ghost Shot, felt like a ghost herself now. Now she struggled to keep her shots steady at 200 meters in front of recruits. Now her legend was a punchline. Hale's arrival spread tension across the base. At 800, he walked the training range, entourage trailing like shadows. Riley felt the weight of his gaze before he spoke. "Commander Grant," he said, voice booming sharp, "I've heard about your situation." The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Around them, recruits froze mid-drill, watching, sensing. Brooks's young eyes widened. Kowalski smirked, savoring the scene. "Yes, sir," Riley answered, steady. "The hand injury, Afghanistan, wasn't it?" His smile was polished, predatory. "Admirable that the Navy found a place for you, training recruits. Less demanding, I imagine." Heat rose in her chest. She swallowed it. "I serve where I'm needed, Admiral." "Of course." His eyes gleamed. "Perhaps you demonstrate proper stance for these recruits, show them how a professional does it." It wasn't a request. All eyes turned to her. She picked up the M16A4, chamber check crisp, safety flick precise. The rifle felt natural in her grip, too natural. She took her place, sights aligned, stock pressed to her shoulder. The first shot cracked, wide, dust kicked 6 inches off the mark. Someone snickered behind her. Her hand trembled again, betraying her. Second shot closer, still off. Third worse. By the 5th, the target looked like it had been peppered by a nervous rookie, not a woman with 18 years in combat. "Interesting technique," Hale said smoothly. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers as he plucked the rifle away like taking a toy from a child. "May I?" Without waiting, he shouldered the weapon. Textbook form, theatrical precision. He fired. Miss again. Miss, his follow-through sloppy, breathing erratic, confidence compensating for skill. When he handed the rifle back, his tone dripped with contempt. "Equipment malfunction. Some weapons require more maintenance than others." The insult wasn't subtle. Riley was the malfunction, the broken weapon. Brooks stared at the ground, cheeks flushed. Morales, who had slipped into the crowd, glared daggers but said nothing. Kowalski smirked openly now, the story already writing itself in his mind. "Thank you for the demonstration, Commander," Hale said, turning away. "Most educational." And just like that, she was dismissed. That night, Riley walked the base under the stars. The Nevada desert was a different world in darkness, sharp and cold, stars glittering like distant fire. She carried the Barrett M82A1 on her shoulder, its weight both burden and comfort. Range 7 was closed officially, but rules bent for those who still had keys. She set up 6 targets, closest at 400 meters, farthest at 1,200, moving, stationary, barely visible in night vision, the kind of shots that once defined her. The Barrett settled into her shoulder. Breath slowed, heart rate fell, the tremor vanished. One by one, the targets fell. Steel shattered at 400, at 600, at 800, each impact a reminder, each recoil a memory. By the time the final target at 1,200 meters disintegrated into sparks, Riley wasn't thinking about failure anymore. "Damn, Riley." She spun. Morale stood 20 meters back, green glow from night vision goggles painting her face. "How long?" Riley asked. "Long enough." Morales walked closer, eyes fixed on the Barrett. That's not just good, that's competition level, Olympic level, and you've been sandbagging. Why? Riley disassembled the rifle with practiced motions, each piece sliding into its case like parts of her identity she didn't know how to carry. Because, she said finally, if I admit I can still do this, then I admit everything else is in my head, and maybe failure feels safer than being expected to succeed again. Morales let the silence sit heavy between them before answering. Hale's planning something. Friday, he wants a public example. Word is, you're it. Riley closed the rifle case, movements precise, deliberate. Then he'll get his chance. But as they walked back toward the barracks, Riley thought of the 6 perfect shots echoing across the desert night. For the first time in months, she felt like ghost shot again. 3 days until the demonstration. 3 days until she decided who she was. Why did the Marine keep circling her like a wolf that smelled blood? Sergeant Red Kowalski had a talent for timing. He never challenged directly, never risked insubordination. Instead, he hovered at the edges, waiting for cracks. And in the heat of Thursday morning, cracks were all too easy to find. The recruits were running combat movement drills, sweat soaking through fatigues before 9 a.m. The Nevada desert didn't forgive. Riley stood at the edge of the training yard, stopwatch in one hand, voice steady as she called commands. Time, she shouted as the last group stumbled across the line. Weapons fumbled, magazines clattered. A few had promise, most did not, but it was still early in their careers. Kowalski's voice carried across the yard. Not bad for squids. His grin was wide, words pitched just loud enough to catch the recruits, who shifted uneasily at the jab. In the Corps, we shave a few more seconds. Life or death doesn't wait for you to figure out which way the magazine goes. Some of the younger sailors chuckled nervously. They didn't know better. They thought it was banter. Riley heard the edge. The recruits weren't supposed to see her bleed, but they were watching her falter all the same. Brooke stood stiffly at the side of the formation, jaw set, eyes flicking between her and Kowalski. The kid was loyal, too loyal for his own good. Riley lifted the stopwatch. Standard tactical reload, she said evenly. Demonstration. She picked up an M16 from the rack. The chamber checked the safety, the motions, smooth in private but clumsy with an audience. Her hand trembled, small at first, then enough to shift her grip. The first magazine seated properly. The second jammed at the angle. She adjusted, wasting precious seconds. Reset. Try again. The seconds bled away like water from a cracked canteen. When she finally slapped the rifle back into firing position, the time was nearly double what it should have been. The recruits stared, some confused, some embarrassed for her. A few, those too green to understand, smirked. Interesting technique, Kowalski drawled. His tone was respectful enough to avoid reprimand, but every word dripped with contempt. Maybe the Navy should issue lighter weapons, more manageable for limitations. The laughter came again, not malicious, just ignorant, but it carved deeper than any insult. Riley had been their instructor, the one teaching them survival. Now in their eyes she was a flaw. Brooks wasn't laughing. His young face burned with something like outrage, though he said nothing. He wanted to step in, wanted to defend, but rank chained his tongue. Dead weight, Kowalski muttered just loud enough. Some people know when it's time to step aside, others have to be shown. It was then that Admiral Hale appeared. His entrance was perfectly timed, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Striding from the administration building, entourage in tow, eyes sweeping the yard with cold calculation. Problem here, Sergeant. His tone said he already knew the answer. No, sir, Kowalski barked, snapping to attention. Commander was showing us some alternative techniques. Hale's thin smile returned. I see. Carry on. I'm sure the recruits are learning a great deal. The words landed heavier than any reprimand. The message was clear. He'd seen enough to confirm what he already believed. Tomorrow would not be a test. It would be an execution. That night, Riley sat in Dr. Janelle Carter's office, the scent of disinfectant mixing with bitter coffee. The base physician adjusted her glasses, scrolling through Riley's file with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many injuries, too many excuses. "How's the hand?" she asked, slipping on gloves. "Fine," Riley answered automatically. "No pain, full range of motion." "Let's see." Carter took Riley's scarred hand in hers, pressing gently, testing flexion resistance. The thin white scar across Riley's palm caught the light, but the hand itself responded perfectly. Grip strength solid, nerve function intact. "Grip strength excellent," Carter said, making notes. "Flexibility within normal range, response normal." She looked up, gaze sharp as a scalpel. "So, why are you shooting like a rookie?" The question landed like a shot. Riley blinked. "Excuse me." "I've seen your records, present and past." Carter leaned back slightly. "Your scores before the injury were elite, ghost shot level elite. Now, you can barely pass qualification. Your hand is fine, your shooting is. So tell me what's really going on." Riley's throat tightened. She flexed the hand again, watching tendons shift beneath scar tissue. She wanted to say it wasn't the same, that the damage was deeper than skin, but the words caught. "Maybe I'm not as good as I used to be." Carter didn't flinch. "I've treated combat injuries for 15 years. I know the difference between damage and hesitation. Your hand is healed. The question is, are you?" Silence filled the room, heavy as desert heat. Riley searched for words. None came. Carter slid a form across the desk. "I'm clearing you for full duty. No restrictions, no excuses." Riley stared at it. On paper, the shield she'd been hiding behind evaporated. No more injury, no more safe out, just choice. "Riley," Carter added, voice softer. "That Ensign Brooks, he's been asking about you, your deployments, your record. He's smart enough to know there's more to your story than whispers." Brooks again. The kid who looked at her like she was still the woman in the files, like legends could walk halls. "He'll be watching tomorrow," Carter said. "They all will. Make sure they see the right thing." Later, back in her quarters, Riley sat at her desk staring at the clearance form. The photo from Afghanistan still stood nearby, her sniper team, faces streaked with camouflage, eyes lit with victory. Once that had been her. Now she was a faded reflection. The smart play would be to let Hale win. Take the transfer, fade quietly into obscurity, safety, stability, silence. But safety wasn't the same as living, and silence wasn't the same as dignity. Tomorrow wasn't just a demonstration, it was a choice. How do you walk toward the gallows without showing fear? The Nevada sun rose merciless, white-hot against the desert floor, by the time Riley Grant stepped out of her quarters on Friday morning. The air shimmered in waves, turning the firing range ahead into a mirage. But it wasn't the heat that made her stomach clench, it was the eyes. Everywhere she turned, people were watching. Not openly, not rudely, but the way men and women glance at the condemned when they march past. By 800, the main range looked like a convention of brass. Senior officers from 3 commands, Pentagon officials with clipboards, local leadership in spotless uniforms. It wasn't just an inspection, it was theater. Hale had assembled an audience, and Riley was the final act. 6 weapon stations lined the range, each one a carefully curated display of Navy skill, close quarters drills, rapid-fire carbine handling, breaching maneuvers. She watched the first station from a distance, recruits moving sharp, their instructors louder than necessary, overcompensating under the pressure of visiting eyes. Every shot was measured not in accuracy but in politics. One mistake here could echo in performance reviews, budget allocations, careers. At her side, Morales handed her a cup of coffee, voice pitched low. "Whole Pentagon's out there. Word is, training programs across 3 bases are on the line. This isn't about you, Riley. It's about politics." "That's supposed to make me feel better," Riley muttered, taking the cup. The bitter liquid scalded her tongue, grounding her. Morales didn't answer, just scanned the crowd. Hale's setting the stage. Don't let him write your ending. Across the yard, Ensign Brooks appeared, his cover slightly askew, his face tight with something beyond nerves. He approached with formal steps, every movement betraying youth and conviction. "Commander Grant," he said, voice carefully respectful, "I wanted to thank you for everything. Training been eye-opening." His tone carried layers she recognized, words he wanted to say but couldn't. He had been digging into her past, piecing together fragments of a story buried under redactions and rumors. He knew enough to suspect she wasn't who the whispers claimed she was. She gave him the smallest nod. "Good luck today, Ensign." But her voice lacked conviction, and she knew he heard it. Then Hale's voice cracked across the range like a whip. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today you'll see the advanced marksmanship capabilities we've developed at Fallen. Each station represents a critical skill: close quarters, breaching, combat movement, and finally, precision long-range shooting." His gaze cut through the crowd and found Riley. She felt it like a spotlight, merciless, pinning her in place. "Our final demonstration," he continued, "will feature the Barrett M82A1, 50 caliber, capable of engagements beyond 1,500 meters, a weapon of legends, and one requiring exceptional skill." The implication was clear. Everyone in the crowd knew about her hand. Everyone had heard the rumors. This was the setup. The stage was his. "Commander Grant," Hale said, voice booming, "would you join us at the precision station? Show our guests what Navy marksmanship looks like." Every step toward the firing line felt heavier than the last. 200 pairs of eyes tracked her across the open ground. The Barrett waited on its bipod, black steel, gleaming under the sun like an executioner's blade. She lowered herself behind it, motions deliberate. The rifle felt impossibly heavy, as though the desert itself pressed against her shoulders. She checked the scope, adjusted the bipod. 6 targets stretched across the range, 400 to 1,200 meters, staggered in difficulty. Targets she'd hit in darkness 3 nights earlier without hesitation. Now, with eyes on her, her hand began to tremble before she even touched the trigger. First shot, wide. Dust kicked 10 inches off the 400-meter plate. A murmur rippled through the crowd, not surprise but confirmation. This was what they expected. She adjusted, fired again, closer but off. Third shot worse. By the fourth, she could hear whispers behind her. By the fifth, someone muttered openly about relieving her of duty. By the sixth, her target board looked like it had been shot at by a novice. "Perhaps the rifle requires adjustment," Hale said smoothly, stepping forward, voice carrying false concern. "Equipment can be unreliable." He approached with the air of a man about to prove a point. The crowd parted for him. He crouched behind the Barrett, shouldering the weapon with practiced theater. "The key," he said loudly, "is fundamentals, breathing, trigger control, the difference between amateurs and professionals." His stance was flawless, his confidence absolute, the image perfect until he fired. The shot went so wide it missed the frame entirely, dirt erupting 30 meters off target. Silence fell. "Wind compensation," Hale said quickly. He adjusted, fired again, miss another. His third shot clipped the frame but 6 feet low. With every failure his facade cracked. His smile strained, his words rushed. "Calibration issues," he muttered. "Scope misaligned, barrel warped." He stood abruptly, face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "This weapon is not serviceable." His eyes flicked toward Riley, seeking an outlet, someone to blame. "Perhaps the entire program is compromised." And something in her finally broke. Not anger, not humiliation, something colder, sharper. The same clarity she'd felt in Afghanistan when the world narrowed to a rifle scope and a single heartbeat. "Sir," Riley said quietly, stepping forward, "I'd like my rifle back." The words dropped like a stone into the silence. Every head turned, every eye locked. "Excuse me," Hale's voice cut like glass. "My rifle, Admiral," she repeated, calm, unshaken. "I'd like it back." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. His hands tightened on the stock. He could refuse. He could claim authority. But with 200 witnesses, including Pentagon officials, he couldn't, not without looking weak. With visible reluctance, he handed it over. As her hands closed around the familiar weight, everything fell into place. The trembling vanished. The rifle no longer felt heavy. It felt inevitable. She settled behind it, her body aligning with muscle memory older than doubt. For the first time in months, she didn't care about the eyes, didn't care about the whispers. It was just her, the rifle, and the truth she couldn't keep buried. The first target at 400 meters disappeared in a spray of sparks. No pause, no hesitation. She cycled the rifle, sighted again. Second target at 600 hit dead center, third, fourth, fifth. Each one fell with surgical precision. The sixth target sat at 1,200 meters, wavering in the heat. She breathed, let her heart slow, found the stillness between beats, and squeezed. The steel plate rang like a bell, dead center. 6 shots, 6 hits, 90 seconds. When she rose from the rifle, the silence wasn't doubt anymore. It was awe. Hale's face had gone pale, jaw tight, eyes wide with something he couldn't mask. The crowd leaned forward, energy shifting like a tide. Brooks's face lit with stunned relief, the kid who had believed when no one else would. For the first time in months, Riley felt like herself again. The woman they had buried in whispers wasn't gone after all. She was standing in the desert, rifle smoking, waiting for what came next. What happens when a legend decides to stop hiding? The desert air was still humming from the last echo of Riley's sixth shot when Admiral Hale stepped forward. His face was flushed, his hand twitching as though he couldn't decide whether to applaud, reprimand, or strangle her. For a moment, he seemed to have regained his composure. His voice carried over the range, clipped, brittle. "Impressive shooting, Commander. Perhaps the rifle's calibration issues have temporarily resolved themselves." He reached for the Barrett as if reclaiming it might rewrite what had just happened. His fingers closed around the stock, entitled, casual, dismissive. The gesture of a man who had spent a career taking without asking. Riley's grip tightened. 18 years of discipline told her to let go, but something deeper, something older, rose up inside her. She wasn't just holding a weapon, she was holding herself. The joint lock was instinct. Smooth, efficient. A twist of bone and leverage so precise it might as well have been muscle memory from birth. The crack was audible. Hale's breath hitched, sharp and broken, as his knees buckled. His hand folded at an unnatural angle against his chest, pain etching his perfect posture into something jagged and human. Riley didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, colder than desert wind. "My rifle, my demonstration, my range." A ripple moved through the crowd. Shock first, then chaos. Security shifted uneasily. Officers reached for radios. The murmur of voices rose like surf before a storm. But Riley wasn't done. She turned back to the firing line, to the untouched field of mechanized targets waiting like an unanswered challenge. "Range control," she called out, voice carrying across the sudden tension. "Activate sequence 7, maximum difficulty." A pause, confusion in the control booth, then the machine's word to life. 6 moving silhouettes burst across the desert floor, mounted on tracks, weaving between obstacles. The closest at 500 meters, darting left to right. The farthest nearly 1,500, vanishing behind berms like ghosts. This was the hardest sequence the base could simulate, combat at its most chaotic, designed to break even elite marksmen. The crowd leaned forward, pulled into the gravity of the moment. 200 people held their breath. Riley lowered herself behind the Barrett again. The rifle kissed her shoulder, her cheek settling against the stock. Time stretched thin. Her breathing slowed. Her heart sank into rhythm. The first target cut across at a steady pace. She tracked it, led by a fraction, squeezed. The round tore through center mass, spinning the steel plate into the dirt. The second was faster, weaving. She waited for the brief predictability of its arc, then fired. Impact dead center. Third, fourth, each more complex, each falling under the roar of the .50 caliber, the sound echoing across the range like thunder rolling down mountainsides. The fifth target was nearly invisible, small, jerking behind cover at 1,200 meters. Riley felt the wind shift against her cheek, calculated the drag, the drop. She led by 6 feet, fired, and watched the round punch through steel that looked untouchable. The sixth and final target slowed, almost merciful, as if the operator behind the controls was offering her a way out. But Riley didn't need mercy. Not anymore. She lined it up at 1,400 meters. The trigger broke like glass. The steel plate disintegrated in the scope's magnification, clean and absolute. 6 moving targets, 6 hits, less than 2 minutes. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was reverence. She rose from the Barrett, the desert wind tugging at her uniform. 200 eyes stared at her like they had seen something impossible, something mythic. Brooks's hands began to clap, tentative at first, then harder, faster. The sound spread, recruits joining, then junior officers, then even seasoned commanders. Applause built into a wave, crashing across the range until the air itself vibrated with it. Admiral Hale was still on his knees, cradling his broken hand, face ashen with pain and humiliation. His aura of authority, the polished confidence he wore like armor, was gone. "Equipment's functioning normally, sir," Riley said, her voice cutting through the applause like a blade. "No calibration issues detected." Medics rushed forward, Dr. Carter among them, crouching beside the Admiral. Her diagnosis was brisk, clinical, offered loud enough for all to hear. "Fractured radius, clean break, he'll heal." The crowd shifted, attention moving from the fallen Admiral to the woman who had just rewritten her own story. Conversations buzzed, whispers carrying like sparks in dry brush. The Navy ran on stories as much as orders, and within hours this one would spread to every corridor, every mess hall, every quiet phone call home. Kowalski approached, swagger gone. His voice was low, respectful. "Commander, that was something else, professional level, hell, beyond anything I've seen." She gave him a single nod. Nothing more needed to be said. The shooting had spoken for her. Brooks appeared next, his young face glowing with vindication. "I knew it," he whispered, voice almost reverent. "I dug through the files, the deployments, the citations. Most of it was blacked out, but I pieced enough together. Commander, you were a legend. They called you Ghost Shot. The insurgents thought you were a myth." The name struck her like an echo from another life. Ghost Shot. Once it had meant fear, precision, inevitability. Now it felt like both a burden and a gift. "Why did you hide it?" Brooks asked. "Why let them think you were finished?" She searched his eyes, saw the hunger of youth, the need for answers. But how could she explain? That competence was a weight. That every perfect shot created expectations no one could sustain forever. That sometimes it was easier to be dismissed than to risk being found wanting when it mattered. "Because," she said finally, "legends don't get to be human. And sometimes being human is harder than being perfect." Morales arrived, dark eyes gleaming with pride she didn't bother hiding. "Hell of a demonstration, Commander. Think you made an impression." The applause was dying down now, replaced by quiet conversations, recalculations. The visiting Pentagon officials huddled in murmurs, eyes sharp, taking in not just the shooting but the politics. One broke away. A woman with captain's bars, her bearing crisp, her presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. She extended her hand. "Commander Grant," she said. "Captain Sarah Mitchell, Navy Personnel Command. I think we need to talk." Her tone carried the weight of decisions that changed careers, that reshaped futures. Riley shook her hand, steady, calm, her own pulse finally slowing. Hours later, she sat in the base commander's office reviewing orders that hadn't existed that morning. Captain Mitchell's voice echoed in her memory: advanced precision, combat experience, proven training ability. We may have overlooked you. We don't intend to again. Overlooked. The word carried both indictment and invitation. Politics had almost buried her, but performance had dug her back out. Walking back to her quarters that evening, Riley felt eyes following her again, but not the pitying eyes of whispers, not the calculating eyes of predators. These were different, wide, respectful, awed. Recruits who had laughed yesterday now watched her with something like reverence. Officers who had dismissed her measured their words more carefully. Even Kowalski, the Marine who had smirked at every tremor, gave her space. Brooks intercepted her outside the barracks. "Commander," he said, his voice earnest, almost emotional, "thank you for showing me what leadership really looks like." "And what does it look like, Ensign?" she asked. He thought about it, then said quietly, "It looks like letting people underestimate you until the moment you prove them wrong. It looks like caring more about truth than appearances." Smart kid. He might survive the politics after all. Alone that night, Riley sat in her quarters staring at the photograph from Afghanistan. Her sniper team, faces painted, eyes alight. For months she'd looked at it and seen strangers. Tonight she saw herself again, not untouched, not unscarred, but alive. The injury had been real. The doubt had been real. The humiliation, the whispers, the failure, they had all been real too. But resilience wasn't pretending none of it happened. It was standing up anyway. It was firing again anyway. Outside, the desert stretched endless and silent, mountains rising in the distance like old sentinels. This place had broken her, and now it had remade her. Some warriors didn't shatter. They bent, they adapted, they became something new. And sometimes, they reminded the world what unstoppable really looked like. Why did silence feel heavier after applause than before it? The Nevada night was quiet, the kind of quiet that rang in the ears after a storm. Riley sat at her desk, the Barrett cleaned and locked away in its case, the desert air drifting through her open window. The photo from Afghanistan stared back at her. For the first time in months, she didn't look at it with shame. But the applause hadn't lifted her. It had weighed her down in a different way, because now there would be expectations. Now the whispers had turned into something else, and expectations were always heavier than doubt. The base had changed overnight. The story of what happened on Range 7 was already spreading through the network of sailors and Marines like wildfire. By dinner, recruits who had smirked at her in class were staring with awe. By midnight, the officers' mess buzzed with retellings that grew with each version. By morning, Riley wasn't just the broken instructor. She was the woman who destroyed 6 moving targets and the Admiral's hand in one day. Legends grew fast, too fast. Morales met her at the mess hall the next morning, sliding a tray down beside her with a grin sharp enough to cut. "You've caused a damn earthquake, Riley. Commanders can't stop talking. Pentagon's still buzzing. Even Kowalski's eating humble pie." "I didn't set out to humiliate anyone," Riley muttered, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. "No, but you didn't stop yourself either," Morales shot back. "And maybe that's the point. You reminded them the Navy isn't just about rank and ribbons. It's about competence. They needed to see it. You gave it to them." Riley didn't answer, because Morales was right, and being right meant a storm was coming. 2 days later, Captain Sarah Mitchell called her into the command office. The woman's presence filled the room, crisp and deliberate. She handed Riley a folder thick with orders. "Special Warfare Command," Mitchell said flatly. "They want you training operators. Advanced marksmanship, sniper development, 6-month transfer, possibly permanent. This came down from high." Riley blinked. "Why me?" "You really want me to answer that?" Mitchell's voice softened, though her eyes didn't. "Because you embarrassed a flag officer and proved you're not just serviceable, you're exceptional. Because whispers don't decide careers, performance does. Because right now, half the Navy is talking about you, and Personnel Command would rather use that momentum than bury it. Riley stared at the folder. The path laid out inside was clear, sharp, a return to relevance, a chance to matter again. But relevance came with cost. Mitchell seemed to read the hesitation. I know what you're thinking. You wanted obscurity, a desk job, safety, but you've been hiding, and people like you don't get to hide forever, not when the Navy needs you. She signed the orders before she could stop herself. That night she walked the base like a ghost, letting the desert wind strip the day from her skin. She paused by the firing range, the ground still scarred from where her rounds had struck steel. The silence felt different now. Not hostile, not heavy with doubt. It was waiting. Brooks found her there, young and sharp, still carrying the awe of what he'd seen. "Commander," he said, voice hesitant, "can I ask you something?" "You just did." He smiled nervously, then sobered. "What does it feel like to be legendary?" She looked at him, really looked. Saw the hunger, the admiration, the belief that people like her never faltered. And she wanted to tell him the truth, that legends felt lonely, that they weren't born from triumph but from surviving failure, that being called a myth didn't erase the nights you shook with doubt in the dark. Instead, she said, "It feels heavy, Ensign, like carrying something you can't put down." He frowned, thoughtful, chewing on her words. "Then why carry it?" "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "carrying it keeps someone else alive." Brooks nodded slowly, as if storing the answer for later, for when his own storms would come. The following day she visited the infirmary. Admiral Hale was gone, transferred quietly to a hospital facility. His absence spoke louder than any reprimand. Officers whispered about his future, most assuming it was over. But Riley knew better. Men like Hale didn't vanish. They regrouped, they rebuilt, and they remembered. Dr. Carter handed her a clean bill of health. "No restrictions," she said. "Not that you need me to tell you anymore. You've already proved it." Riley signed the paper, but her mind wasn't on it. Her mind was on what came next. Special Warfare Command. Elite operators. The kind of assignment most people would kill for, and all she felt was the weight of returning to a life she thought she'd buried. That night, Morales came to her quarters with 2 beers, and a look that said she wasn't leaving until Riley talked. "You don't look happy for someone who just got handed the golden ticket," Morales said, kicking her boots onto the desk. "Because it's not a ticket," Riley muttered. "It's a leash. They'll pull me back into a world I barely survived the first time." Morales tilted her head. "And what's the alternative? Hiding here, waiting for your name to fade? You think that's safer? I've watched you these last months, Riley. You weren't living, you were stalling." Riley didn't argue, because deep down she knew Morales was right. The desert outside stretched endlessly, stars glittering against black sky. Riley stared at them, remembering nights on Afghan ridgelines, scope glowing green, the world reduced to distances and patience. She remembered the silence before a shot, the calm certainty that came when her finger touched the trigger. That silence had returned on Range 7. It had reminded her who she was. But it also reminded her of the cost. When the orders came through officially, she packed slowly, folding uniforms with precision, sliding the Barrett's case shut, each movement deliberate, as though leaving fallen behind was both escape and exile. As she zipped the final duffel, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't the broken instructor anymore. She wasn't the ghost either. She was something in between, human, scarred, but still standing. And maybe that was enough. On her last night, Brooks caught up with her outside the barracks. He looked nervous, hands jammed into his pockets. "Commander," he said, voice low, "I just wanted to say you showed me what leadership looks like, and I won't forget it." She studied him, the earnestness, the hunger. He reminded her of herself once, before politics dulled her edges, before doubt made her hide. "Leadership isn't about being perfect," she told him softly. It's about standing up when it matters, even if you've been knocked down first. Remember that. Brooks nodded, eyes shining. He would. She knew he would. Later, alone in her quarters, Riley sat with the photograph one last time. Her team, her past, her proof that she'd been someone once. For the first time in months, she felt ready to let the picture be what it was, a memory, not a burden. The desert outside stretched eternal, unforgiving but beautiful in its own harsh way. She whispered into the silence, not for anyone else but for herself. Some things don't break, they just change shape. And with that, she turned out the light. Why did the silence of a new command feel sharper than the whispers at the old one? Coronado smelled different. Salt air and jet fuel mixed on the breeze, replacing Nevada dust and scorched metal. The ocean stretched wide beyond the compound, a horizon of endless possibility and unspoken judgment. Riley stood at the edge of the training grounds, duffel slung over her shoulder, orders tucked in her jacket. Her boots crunched against gravel as she approached the gate where a young petty officer checked her ID. His eyes flicked to the name, then back to her face. Recognition, maybe, or maybe just the echo of the story that had already traveled this far. "Welcome to Special Warfare Command, ma'am," he said, his tone clipped, respectful but guarded. Respect here was currency. It wasn't given, it was earned, and Riley knew the price. Inside the compound, the world was all hard edges, obstacle courses carved into sand, firing ranges that stretched toward the ocean, barracks lined with silent precision. Operators moved through drills with a fluid confidence born of repetition. They didn't look at her, not directly, but she felt the weight of their awareness, the way predators clock the presence of another animal in their space. Captain Mitchell had been blunt in her briefing. "You'll be training our best. They don't like outsiders. They don't like instructors who haven't been where they've been. And they sure as hell don't like being told what to do. Earn their respect or get eaten alive." She hadn't added the part Riley already knew. They'd heard the whispers too. Broken hand, washed-up sniper. A woman whose name lived in classified footnotes but not in open acknowledgement. Her first morning began before dawn. The Pacific sky was barely bleeding light when she walked to the long-range range with her Barrett case slung at her side. A dozen operators were already there, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. SEALs, Rangers, quiet professionals with eyes that measured everything. Chief Petty Officer Daniels, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, stepped forward. "So you're the one they sent." His voice was low, carrying the weight of authority earned in sand and blood. Riley set the case on the bench, snapping it open with deliberate calm. "Commander Riley Grant, I'll be running your precision modules." A ripple of amusement passed through the group. Not overt laughter, but something sharper, skepticism, disbelief. Riley felt it like heat against her skin. "Word is," Daniels said, folding his arms, "you embarrassed a flag officer in Nevada." "Word travels fast." "Word also says you've been coasting since your injury. That true?" She met his gaze steady. "You want to find out?" He held her stare for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Show us then. Steel at one click. Wind's rough today." The range stretched inland, wind rolling off the ocean to push against everything in its path. Targets glinted faintly at 1,000 meters, barely visible through the shimmer. Riley lowered herself behind the Barrett, the motions automatic. Her cheeks settled into the stock, breath slowing, heart falling into rhythm. The first shot cracked across the range. A second later, the steel plate rang like a church bell. A few operators shifted. No words, no applause, but silence of a different kind, the silence of acknowledgement. She worked through the next set, 800 meters, 1,200, each one fell, precision cutting through wind and distance. By the time she rose from the rifle, the skepticism had thinned. Not gone, but thinned. Daniels gave a short grunt. Not bad. It was more than most got on their first day. But she knew this wasn't enough. Hitting targets was proof of skill. Leading operators required more. The days that followed blurred into sweat and grit. She ran them through drills, corrected stances, forced repetition until their movements were precise enough to survive combat. They pushed back, of course, testing her, some with open challenges, others with quiet sabotage, missing equipment, a scope misaligned, a rifle magazine accidentally unloaded. Riley didn't flinch. She corrected, adapted, outlasted. Every mistake they threw at her she turned into a lesson. Every challenge she met without theatrics. Still the whispers lingered, the doubts. One evening after 12 hours on the range, Daniels approached as the others packed gear. "Why are you here, Commander?" His tone wasn't hostile, just tired, honest. "Orders," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him, at the weathered lines around his eyes, the quiet authority of a man who had lost friends he couldn't name aloud. "Because once I was good at this, and I forgot what that meant. I'm here to remember, and maybe to pass it on." He studied her, then nodded slowly. No smile, no warmth, just respect. That night, alone in her quarters overlooking the ocean, Riley stared at the waves pounding against the shore. She had thought Fallen was her final test, that breaking Hale's hand and hitting 6 impossible targets was the climax of her story. But standing here now, she realized it was only prologue. These men didn't care what she'd done in Nevada. They cared about what she could do here, every day, every shot. The photograph from Afghanistan sat on her desk, the edges worn from years of being carried through deployments. She touched it lightly, then set it face down. Fallen had reminded her of who she used to be. Coronado was going to decide who she was now. The next morning, the ocean fog rolled thick over the compound, shrouding the range in gray. Perfect weather for testing instinct. Riley set up a moving target drill, the kind most instructors avoided for risk of embarrassment. She told the operators nothing, just signaled. Targets burst from the fog, weaving fast, unpredictable. Shots cracked, missing wide, echoing back like taunts. Riley dropped behind the Barrett. One breath, one heartbeat. Her round tore through steel at 600 meters, then another at 900, each shot ringing true in the fog. The operators fell silent, watching her cut through the uncertainty with unshaken calm. When the drill ended, Daniels gave a short nod, approval, the kind that mattered. Brooks's voice echoed in her memory then, from Fallen. "What does leadership look like?" It looked like standing steady in fog when everyone else missed. It looked like proving, again and again, that whispers weren't destiny. That night, as she walked the shoreline, the Pacific waves roaring at her feet, Riley let the wind carry the doubt out to sea. Fallen had been survival. Coronado was becoming purpose. Still, she knew the cost. Legends didn't get to rest. Legends carried weight. But for the first time, she thought maybe she could carry it without breaking. How do you teach men who don't want a teacher? The answer came in the middle of the night, when a knock at Riley's door pulled her from shallow sleep. She rolled out of bed, instinct snapping her awake before her mind caught up. Daniel stood in the hall, shadowed by the dim light. "Gear up, we're running a scenario." Now. He didn't wait for an answer. 15 minutes later, Riley was in the back of a Humvee bouncing through dirt trails that cut inland from the coast. The operators around her were silent, faces painted in camouflage, eyes scanning even though this wasn't real combat. The exercise had been sprung on them with no warning, part of a schedule designed to replicate chaos. Daniels leaned forward. "This isn't classroom, you'll be running with them." Riley studied his face. "Why?" "Because paper doesn't prove anything. You want their respect. Show them you can keep up." The convoy stopped near a ridgeline where moonlight cut jagged shadows across the terrain. A valley stretched below, dotted with mock structures designed to simulate a hostile village. Steel silhouettes marked hostiles, while sensors tracked accuracy and response. The rules were simple: infiltrate, neutralize, extract. fast and clean. Riley followed the team down the slope, rifle steady in her hands. She hadn't done this in years, not since Afghanistan. The desert air there had carried the same metallic tang of nerves. She remembered the silence before shots, the calm before chaos. The operators moved like ghosts, communication reduced to hand signals, their rhythm practiced. Riley mirrored them, muscle memory slipping back into place. She wasn't their equal in endurance anymore, but precision was something else. Precision was eternal. The first silhouettes appeared through the night fog. Two operators lifted rifles, rounds snapping through steel. The silhouettes dropped with a clang. They advanced deeper into the valley, weaving between structures. A moving target cut across their flank. One operator's shot went wide. Riley tracked it in a heartbeat and fired, the steel collapsing with a sharp ring. The team glanced at her, brief but unmistakable. Not dismissal this time, recognition. By the time they reached the village center, the exercise was in full chaos. Targets popped from windows. Mock explosions rattled the ground. The operators split into fire teams, methodical, brutal in their efficiency. Riley took position at Overwatch. Barrett settled against a sandbag. Through the scope she scanned. She found the angles, the blind spots. She called out corrections, warnings, covering shots. Every trigger pull landed clean, precise. When one operator froze, pinned by a moving silhouette he couldn't track, Riley's shot cut it down before he even finished cursing. The mission ended 40 minutes later, every target down, every hostage secured. The team regrouped at the extraction point, breaths heavy, sweat streaking through paint. Daniels looked at her, the faintest of nods. "Not bad, Commander." It was the highest compliment she could expect. But that night, as she stripped her gear in the barracks, the silence returned. Not hostile, not dismissive, just heavy. She'd proven herself again, and proving meant carrying more. The next day, Daniels called her into his office. He leaned against the desk, arms folded, studying her like a puzzle. "You've got their attention now, but attention isn't trust. They'll follow your lead on the range. In the field," he shook his head. "Not yet." "I didn't come here to be liked," Riley said. "You think this is about being liked?" His voice sharpened. "These men only follow people they trust with their lives, respect you've earned. Trust comes when they believe you'll bleed with them. Without that, you're still just an instructor." The words dug under her skin, because she knew he was right. Later that week, another drill came. This time, urban combat. Narrow hallways built from plywood, silhouettes tucked into shadows, strobe lights disorienting vision. Riley ran it with them, sweat dripping into her eyes as she cleared rooms. At one corner, a target popped into her periphery. She spun, fired, dropped it in an instant. Another silhouette appeared at her back too late. She froze, but one of the operators cut it down, covering her with a sharp shout. Afterward, the man, a wiry SEAL with scars Riley didn't ask about, stared at her. "You're fast, but you still think alone. Out here, that gets people killed." The words hit harder than any reprimand. He wasn't wrong. She'd spent so many years in Overwatch, alone with her scope, that moving as part of a unit felt foreign. That night she sat by the shoreline, waves pounding. Her reflection in the dark water showed someone caught between roles, sniper and leader, myth and human. Brooks's question echoed in her memory, why carry it? Because carrying it meant survival, but survival wasn't the same as belonging. The following week, Daniels gave her one more chance, a live-fire exercise that blurred the line between training and combat. They were dropped inland at dusk, tasked with securing a mock airstrip under simulated hostile fire. Sensors tracked hits, but the rounds were live. Any mistake carried real consequences. The first 10 minutes were chaos. Gunfire rattled across the field. Operators moved low, fast, coordinated. Riley stayed at the rear, Barrett covering their advance. Her rounds dropped silhouettes at long range, each one ringing loud against steel. But then something shifted. A young operator, barely more than a kid, moved too far ahead, separated from his team. Targets closed in from multiple angles. He froze. Riley didn't think. She moved. Sliding down from her perch, she sprinted across open ground, rounds cracking overhead. She dropped behind cover beside him, her presence jolting him back into motion. Together they cleared the lane, her Barrett thunderous at close range, his rifle steadying under her command. When they reached the team again, the kid looked at her differently. Not with awe, not with doubt, with trust. The exercise ended in near silence. No applause, no chatter, just a wait Riley recognized, acknowledgement. Daniels approached as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the airstrip in fire. "They'll follow you now," he said simply. Riley looked out at the team, tired, dirty, alive. They didn't smile at her. They didn't thank her. But when their eyes met hers, there was no question left. That night, alone in her quarters, Riley finally allowed herself a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since fallen. She wasn't just proving she could still shoot. She was proving she could still lead. But leadership carried a cost. She knew the Navy. Word would spread. Stories would grow. And soon it wouldn't just be about proving herself to these men. It would be about proving herself to everyone watching from the shadows. The waves outside crashed harder against the shore, as if the ocean itself was reminding her. Legends didn't rest. Legends carried weight. And she wasn't done carrying it yet. What does it mean to be remembered? Weeks passed at Coronado, each day blurring into drills, sweat, and salt air. Riley moved through them with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. The operators no longer tested her. They no longer questioned whether she belonged. When she spoke, they listened. When she gave direction, they moved. It wasn't about awe anymore. It was trust. One evening, Daniels found her at the range long after the others had gone. She was sitting cross-legged, Barrett disassembled across the bench, each part cleaned with meticulous care. "You're not like the instructors they usually send," he said quietly. "Meaning?" "You don't just teach, you carry something. The kind of weight you only get from bleeding for real." He paused. "That matters to them, to me." Riley nodded but said nothing. Because the truth was she did carry it. Every shot she'd ever taken, every silence that had followed, every life that had ended in her scope. Legends weren't built from triumphs. They were built from burdens. And burdens never left you. One night, Captain Mitchell returned from Washington, bringing orders sealed in crisp envelopes. Riley was summoned to the briefing room where the operators waited, the air charged. "New directive," Mitchell said. "A joint operation overseas. Training role, limited exposure, but we want you in the field as an advisor." The operators glanced at her. None spoke, but their eyes asked the question, would she go? "Yes," Riley said simply. The mission came weeks later. A desert valley half a world away, not unlike Afghanistan. Hostile forces had entrenched themselves, holding ground that mattered more for politics than tactics. The operators moved under cover of night, Riley with them, her presence ghost-like but steady. She didn't fire much. That wasn't her role this time. She advised, she spotted, she directed. But when the moment came, when a hostile sniper pinned them down from a ridgeline, Riley lay prone, Barrett steady, breath calm. One shot clean, the ridgeline fell silent. The team moved forward, not with awe, with trust. When they returned to Coronado, Daniels clapped her on the shoulder. "They'll never doubt you again." But Riley knew it wasn't about doubt anymore. It was about choice. She could stay in this world, keep carrying the weight, or she could walk away knowing she had left it stronger than she found it. The decision haunted her in quiet moments. In the early mornings when the Pacific glowed silver. In the evenings when she sat alone with the Barrett across her knees. She thought of Fallen, of Hale, of Brooks. She thought of Afghanistan. She thought of every silence she had survived. Brooks wrote her once from Fallen. A short letter, hand-scribbled, edges creased. "Commander, I'm pushing harder because of what you showed me. You were right. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about standing up when it matters. Thank you." She folded the letter carefully, setting it beside the photograph of her old team. For the first time, the picture didn't sting. It just was, a memory, a chapter. One afternoon, Morales called. Her voice was warm, teasing. "You're famous again, Riley. Word about Coronado's hitting Washington. They're calling you Ghost Shot again." Riley sighed softly. "I'm not sure that name ever belonged to me." "It belongs to whoever proves it does, and you just did." After the call, Riley walked to the shore. The waves pounded, endless and patient. She breathed in salt and wind and thought about names, about legends, about the truths people never saw. Ghost Shot was a myth. Riley Grant was human. Somewhere in between was the woman standing on the sand, scarred but alive. The Navy would keep telling stories. They always did. But the story she told herself mattered more. And in that story she wasn't broken. She wasn't invincible. She was something far quieter. Resilient. Her final days at Coronado were uneventful on the surface. Paperwork, debriefs, packing her quarters. But beneath it all ran a current of something heavier, closure. The operators lined up to shake her hand before she left. Daniels gave her the briefest of nods, respect without ceremony. The young one she'd saved during the airstrip drill met her eyes with something more, gratitude that didn't need words. At the gate, Captain Mitchell waited. "You're free to stay on, or transfer, or retire. Doors are open now, Riley. They'll listen to you." Riley looked out at the compound, at the men who no longer doubted her, at the Pacific pounding its eternal rhythm. "I think," she said quietly, "it's time to go." Mitchell studied her, then nodded. "Sometimes leaving is the bravest thing." The flight home was quiet. She carried little, just the Barrett case, the photograph, Brooks's letter. When she reached her small house stateside, she set the rifle in its place, the photo back on the shelf. She brewed coffee, sat on the porch, and listened to the morning birds. The world felt smaller but somehow fuller. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to prove anything. She didn't need applause. She didn't need whispers. She didn't need legends. She just needed silence. And in that silence there was peace. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.